Cabin crew slaps black woman not knowing she's the CEO who owns the plane. In a sleek Gulfstream G650 soaring at 40,000 feet, a single instant changed the course of countless lives. It began as a subtle tension in the cabin, an unspoken friction that simmered beneath the polished smiles and crisp uniforms of the flight crew. Then came a shocking moment of violence. A flight attendant, driven by prejudice and pressure, delivered an open-palmed slap to a soft-spoken black woman seated alone in first class. Unbeknownst to them all, that woman was no ordinary passenger. She was the billionaire owner of the very jet they flew upon. This is her story, and theirs. Ebony Dane was no stranger to the delicate interplay between wealth and perception. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, she had carved her own path from humble beginnings. Her father, Ronald Dane, worked long hours as a taxi driver, ferrying people across the city's busy streets, while her mother, Lydia, juggled a job at the public library. Through their dedication, they instilled in Ebony a ferocious work ethic and an unshakable sense of self-worth that would define her life. Even at age 7, Ebony's curiosity had set her apart. When most children were enthralled by cartoons, she was reading old encyclopedias her mother snuck home from the library. While other teens fixated on fashion trends or social media gossip, Ebony's eyes scanned stock tickers and business journals. By the time she was 25, she had founded an innovative tech startup focusing on mobile financial services, aiming to provide easy banking access for underprivileged communities. Her mission resonated with countless venture capitalists, and a string of wise investments, ranging from Silicon Valley software houses to ethically sourced gem mines in Tanzania, catapulted her net worth into the billions by the time she was 35. With her substantial wealth came the necessity of frequent travel, and Ebony decided it was time to purchase her own plane. She had chosen a Gulfstream G650, a masterful piece of aviation engineering known for its long-range capabilities and whisper-quiet cabin. At first, Ebony insisted on personally meeting the pilots, flight attendants, and staff she hired. Her approach was always unorthodox. She wanted to know who she was entrusting her life to, learn about their families, their dreams, and their struggles. Because of her deep empathy, Ebony often found herself in the role of mentor and confidant to her employees, bridging the gap between boss and friend in a manner that sometimes unnerved her advisors. So, on a crisp October morning, Ebony prepared to board her plane for a high-stakes trip that would take her from Atlanta to Los Angeles, then onward to Tokyo, and finally to Dubai, where a multi-billion-dollar development deal awaited her attention. She considered this trip pivotal, not for the money, but for the purpose behind it. She was negotiating with international partners to erect sustainable housing projects in under-resourced regions of the Middle East. Ebony had even managed to pique the interest of real institutions like UNICEF, aiming to transform the conversation around affordable global housing. The morning held that anxious sparkle of new beginnings. Ebony's personal assistant, Camille, typed away on a sleek tablet, verifying the final details of an itinerary that stretched for weeks. Ebony double-checked messages from investors, scanning legal documents from her in-house counsel. The sound of her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Keep your head up, baby girl. The world sees your skin before it sees your heart, but let them see your heart after all." Over the years, Ebony had navigated subtle and overt forms of discrimination, from boardrooms to banks. She had learned to counter them with unwavering grace. Yet the memory of her father's words never lost its edge, a constant reminder that, despite her financial success, prejudice was still a storm cloud looming in any sky. That morning, Ebony felt an undercurrent of unease she couldn't quite place. She was exhausted, worn down by the demands of business expansions and philanthropic responsibilities. More than ever, she yearned for a compassionate team, a sense of peace during her journeys. She hoped to find some rest in the quiet sanctuary of her G650's plush cabin. When she finally arrived at her private hangar, Ebony noticed a group of new faces among the staff. A few fresh flight attendants, hired by the private aviation management company she used. She sighed inwardly, disappointed that she hadn't personally vetted them, as she usually did. Yet time constraints had made her rely on the company's assurances. Perhaps it was an overreaction, but Ebony always felt a tinge of vulnerability around strangers who might be more interested in her net worth than her well-being. She brushed the feeling aside. With her itinerary, she had more pressing matters to worry about. Clad in a simple navy blue suit with minimal jewelry, Ebony exuded an understated elegance that often made her blend into the background, if one ignored the aura of quiet confidence she radiated. A flight attendant named Mark, whom Ebony already knew well, greeted her warmly at the foot of the stairs. He ushered her into the cabin, promising a smooth flight. He looked a bit flustered, managing a polite smile as Ebony stepped into the aircraft's luxurious main cabin. She smiled back, hoping for a restful journey. If only she had known how quickly that hope would unravel. The Gulfstream's interior was a marvel. Cream-colored leather seats, high-gloss wooden veneers, and discreet golden accents. Ebony typically found solace in this space. She would sink into a seat and watch the world shrink beneath her feet, drawing comfort from the hum of jet engines. Today, the hum felt different, as though carrying a subtle disquiet. Camille immediately settled into one of the seats near the galley, busy with Ebony's schedule. Ebony meandered through the cabin, intending to rest in her favorite seat by the large oval window. However, a sharp, disapproving glance from a flight attendant she didn't recognize stopped her in her tracks. This flight attendant was petite, with meticulously groomed hair and a pressed navy uniform. Her name badge read Cheryl Martin. At first glance, Ebony picked up on Cheryl's rigid posture and the forced smile plastered across her face. She sensed an energy that set her nerves on edge. Cheryl's gaze lingered on Ebony's modest attire, from her scuffed carry-on bag to the battered leather folder Ebony clutched. Ebony was used to such appraisals, staff or otherwise, and typically dismissed them. Yet something in Cheryl's eyes seemed more critical than simple curiosity. "Miss," Cheryl began curtly, "may I see your boarding pass?" Ebony blinked. Boarding pass? On her personal plane? But Ebony, ever composed, simply replied, "I'm sorry, I don't have one. I believe I'm on the manifest." Cheryl's brow furrowed. "Company policy states that every passenger should show their pass, Miss Dane," Ebony said softly. "Ebony Dane. Right. Well, Miss Dane, I don't see your pass or your name here." She flipped through her tablet's digital manifest, eyebrows climbing skeptically. "Is this some kind of mix-up?" At that moment, Mark noticed the exchange and hurried over, his expression apologetic. "Cheryl, she's traveling with us. She's the principal." "The principal?" Cheryl repeated, perplexed. Mark's voice dropped, trying to discreetly remind Cheryl that Ebony was no mere passenger. "She's the owner, Cheryl, the principal client, the one we absolutely must treat with utmost respect." A flicker of embarrassment crossed Cheryl's features, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by something resembling indignation. Ebony offered a reassuring smile, trying to ease the moment. "I'm sorry for the confusion. I'm sure everything will be clarified soon." Cheryl's lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course," she said stiffly, turning on her heel and returning to the galley. Mark exhaled. "I'm so sorry, Miss Dane. She's new and we had limited time to brief her." Ebony waved a hand. "No worries. Let's just put this behind us, all right?" Mark managed a small, grateful smile before scurrying away to finalize pre-flight preparations. Ebony, shaking off the encounter, found her seat and gazed out the window. The mechanics on the tarmac were busy securing the steps and ensuring the plane was fueled for its long journey. She closed her eyes and reminded herself that not everyone had the same understanding of her approach to wealth and status. Some might assume a billionaire would flaunt her privilege, arrive in brand-name couture, or travel with a coterie of staff. Ebony had never been that person. She preferred sincerity over spectacle. Soon the cabin door sealed with a muffled click, and the pilots announced their final departure preparations. Takeoff was smooth, a gentle push back in her seat followed by that thrilling sense of leaving the ground behind. Within minutes, they reached cruising altitude. Camille, typically unflappable, adjusted her glasses and murmured about finalizing Ebony's business schedule for Tokyo. Ebony nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the galley, where Cheryl was giving instructions to the other flight attendants with sharp, precise gestures. Midway through the flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles, Ebony decided to stretch her legs. The cabin air felt stuffy, or perhaps the tension made it feel so. She walked quietly to the rear lounge area, where a plush sofa and an array of electronics awaited. She hoped to settle into a calm reading session, or perhaps watch a documentary before dealing with the avalanche of emails waiting for her. That was when she heard hushed voices. It was Cheryl and another attendant, a younger woman with wide, anxious eyes. Ebony paused in the corridor, not quite intending to eavesdrop, but frozen by the conversation that drifted to her ears. "That's the owner?" Cheryl hissed incredulously. "I've served bigger, better clients who at least dress the part. Are you sure she's not some imposter?" The younger attendant sounded unnerved. Mark confirmed it. "She's Ebony Dane, the billionaire. She's known for, being pretty down to earth. She invests in all sorts of charitable causes." Cheryl snorted softly. "Charity, sure. Maybe that's what she calls it. I've seen all types in this industry, trust me. Some trust fund kids just like to pretend they're normal. Well, anyway, you and I know how to handle these flights. Just stick to the instructions and keep your eyes peeled for anything off. This Ebony might pull something." Ebony's breath caught in her throat. She was used to the occasional ignorant remark, but hearing such blatant disrespect in her own plane unsettled her deeply. She took a moment to gather herself, inhaling slowly. Part of her wanted to walk right in, confront Cheryl, and remind her who was paying her salary. Another part urged restraint, to handle the matter with grace. In the end, Ebony stepped back into the main cabin, opting to let her frustrations pass. "I have more important battles to fight," she thought. In mere hours, she would be meeting a representative from UNICEF in Los Angeles to discuss the philanthropic portion of her deal. The last thing she needed was drama within her flight crew. Yet Ebony couldn't shake the pang of disillusionment. She understood that wealth didn't grant immunity from prejudice. Even so, experiencing outright contempt from someone on her own payroll was a bitter reminder of how far society still had to go. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Keep your head up, baby girl. The world sees your skin before it sees your heart." Perhaps Ebony had grown complacent, lulled into a sense of security by the many loyal employees and partners she surrounded herself with. Perhaps she had let her guard down. But soon enough, Cheryl's simmering contempt would erupt into a moment that would test Ebony's resolve and spark a revelation for everyone on board. They touched down briefly in Los Angeles to refuel and to pick up 2 more associates from Ebony's philanthropic circle, Dr. Natalie Brown, an esteemed sociologist, and her husband Greg, a financial consultant. This leg of the journey was crucial. Natalie would accompany Ebony to Tokyo for meetings focusing on educational initiatives for impoverished youth, while Greg offered strategic advice for Ebony's philanthropic budgeting. Together they formed a core part of Ebony's dream team. Brilliant minds aligned toward meaningful impact. As the plane prepared to depart for Tokyo, Ebony took the chance to personally welcome the Browns on board. She gave them both warm hugs, inquiring about their flight from Chicago. They settled into their seats, the tension from earlier overshadowed by the comforting presence of friends and colleagues. For a moment, Ebony relaxed, smiling as she watched Greg admire the cabin's sleek design, and Natalie remark on Ebony's unwavering commitment to the cause. But not everyone shared in that warmth. Cheryl scurried about, focusing on in-flight preparations, her expression tight and unreadable. Ebony tried to catch her eye, hoping to share a friendly smile or a gesture of good faith. Each time, Cheryl either averted her gaze or managed a cursory nod. The tension remained, unspoken but palpable. Takeoff from LAX was smooth, but the flight was long, over 10 hours to Tokyo. Partway into the journey, Ebony decided to finalize a presentation for an upcoming conference. As she settled into her seat with a laptop, Cheryl appeared by her side, balancing a tray of drinks. Ebony looked up, meeting the flight attendant's stare. "Miss Dane, would you like something to drink?" Cheryl asked. The politeness in her tone sounded strained. Ebony nodded politely. "Just water, please." Cheryl placed a glass of sparkling water on Ebony's tray. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling the cabin. The sudden bump made the glass wobble, some water sloshing over the rim. Cheryl's quick movement to steady the glass caused her elbow to bump Ebony's laptop. It clattered onto the side table but fortunately did not sustain damage. Instantly, Cheryl's composure cracked. "You really should be more careful," she snapped under her breath, giving Ebony a stern glare. Ebony blinked. "I'm sorry?" Cheryl straightened, jaw tight. She glanced around, noticing that Mark and the other attendants were busy. Lowering her voice, she spoke through clenched teeth. "Look, I'm not here to babysit your electronics. This is a high-end aircraft, and we hold ourselves to certain standards." Ebony's chest tightened. She hadn't imagined the edge in Cheryl's voice. Calmly, she replied, "I appreciate your concern, but it was turbulence and the laptop is fine. It's no one's fault." Cheryl's mouth thinned. "I'm simply suggesting you be more cautious with your belongings." She left, allowing Ebony no chance to respond. Ebony placed a hand over her heart, trying to steady her breathing. "She's having a bad day," Ebony reasoned. "Don't escalate." Besides, Ebony had other matters to attend to. Emails from investors, philanthropic proposals, meeting agendas. Focusing on her work, Ebony drowned out the negativity as best she could. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt the churn of something deeply unsettling. A few hours into the flight, Ebony got up to stretch once again. She noticed Natalie in quiet conversation with Camille near the galley. Natalie's typically radiant face seemed drawn, her brows knitted with concern. As Ebony approached, she caught the tail end of their hushed exchange. "I'm telling you, something's off with her," Natalie whispered. "She wouldn't even give me a glass of water without a sneer." Camille shook her head. "I've tried being polite. She just snaps at me too. Mark says she's never been this way on other flights. Maybe it's Ebony's presence she doesn't like." They halted their conversation the moment they spotted Ebony. "You both okay?" Ebony asked softly, glancing between them. Natalie sighed. "We're fine, but your flight attendant Cheryl, she's been downright unpleasant. I'd understand if it was just one instance, but she keeps making passive-aggressive comments." Camille nodded in agreement. "She seems especially tense around people of color. I know Mark mentioned she's worked commercial flights before, but this is different." Ebony pursed her lips. "I overheard a bit of her conversation earlier," she admitted. She hesitated, weighing how much to share. "She doesn't seem to believe I'm the real owner of this plane. Something about me not looking the part." Natalie's eyes flared with anger. "That's unbelievable. In this day and age, you'd think people would know better." Ebony's mind flicked to her father's cautionary words again. At times, Ebony felt as though the progress society claimed to have made was paper-thin, easily torn by deep-rooted biases. Though Ebony had built a life of influence and respect, bigotry could still greet her at the door. "I'll handle this," Ebony said firmly. "We're stuck on a long flight, but once we land in Tokyo, I'll speak with the aviation management company. If necessary, we'll replace her before the next leg to Dubai." Natalie and Camille nodded, relief flickering in their eyes. Ebony offered them a supportive smile and returned to her seat. She tried to immerse herself in the pages of her business reports, but a quiet anger simmered within. One part of her wanted to call out Cheryl's behavior immediately. Another part cautioned that any confrontation mid-flight could escalate dangerously. Over the years, Ebony had learned to pick her battles, but she also knew that ignoring blatant disrespect helped no one. Hours later, night settled over the plane's interior, the dimmed cabin lighting reminiscent of a gentle twilight. Ebony was drifting in and out of a nap when she heard hushed voices at the seat behind her. Cheryl was speaking to one of the younger attendants again. Ebony strained to hear, but she only caught snatches of the conversation. Words like bossy, money, and they're all like that drifted to her ears. Though Ebony couldn't be certain, the tone reeked of condescension, perhaps laced with something even uglier. Ebony closed her eyes, swallowing back a surge of hurt. She was used to microaggressions, yet nothing prepared her for repeated hostility in her own aircraft. She resolved to address this once they landed. Unfortunately, fate had a cruel trick in store, forcing the confrontation far sooner and with far greater turmoil than she'd anticipated. By the 8th hour of the flight, fatigue weighed on everyone. The plush seats provided comfort, but the extended travel time wore down even the most seasoned flyers. Ebony, feeling restless, made her way to the plane's small lounge in search of a distraction. She found Camille there, flipping through a menu of in-flight meals. "Hungry?" Camille asked, trying to force a smile. Despite the tension, Ebony and her assistant had known each other long enough to exchange the comforting glances of good friends. "Not really," Ebony admitted. "I'm just wired. Too many thoughts on my mind." At that moment, the seatbelt sign dinged on, accompanied by the pilot's smooth voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting some moderate turbulence due to a weather system over the Pacific. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts." With a shared sigh, Ebony and Camille returned to the main cabin. They buckled in, Ebony flipping her phone's flight mode on and off as if it would help quell her anxiousness. The turbulence was mild at first, mere bumps along the flight path. But then the plane shook harder, jostling overhead compartments. A few passengers let out startled yelps. Cheryl sprang into action, striding up the aisle to secure any loose items. The new flight attendants followed her lead, though they seemed a bit panicked. Ebony kept her eyes on Cheryl, noticing the tense set of the woman's shoulders. The plane lurched again, causing Ebony's water glass to topple onto the carpet. That small accident triggered a cascade of events. Sensing a dangerous shift in altitude, Ebony grabbed the edges of her armrests. Camille let out a breathless, "Oh my God," as the plane pitched slightly, then leveled. Over the loudspeaker, the pilot's voice returned. "Folks, we're experiencing stronger turbulence than expected. Flight attendants, please take your seats for safety." Cheryl was assisting an older passenger from Ebony's philanthropic group who had come aboard last minute. She helped him to his seat, but in doing so, she fumbled and knocked a stack of Ebony's documents to the floor, printouts detailing philanthropic strategies for the upcoming UNICEF collaboration. Papers scattered, sliding along the aisle as the plane rocked. Ebony quickly unbuckled, bracing herself against the seat backs, and began gathering them. "Ma'am, remain seated," Cheryl hissed, trying to maintain her composure. Another jolt sent Cheryl stumbling, and she landed awkwardly near Ebony. "I'm just picking up my files," Ebony said, her voice betraying her own tension. Cheryl's eyes flashed. Without warning, she snatched the papers from Ebony's hands. "You're making this worse," she snapped. "Stay seated now." Ebony tightened her grip on the seat, biting back a retort. She reached for another paper drifting by her foot. Suddenly, the plane gave a particularly violent shudder, throwing Cheryl off balance. She collided with Ebony, her elbow striking Ebony's side. Instinctively, Ebony reached out to steady Cheryl, but Cheryl took it as aggression, misreading Ebony's intention entirely. In a moment Ebony would replay countless times, Cheryl's open palm flashed out in a moment of panic and frustration. Slap. The sound was sharp, reverberating through the tense cabin. Ebony's head jerked to the side as the sting radiated across her cheek. For the briefest instant, time seemed suspended. The entire cabin hushed in shock. Even the turbulence seemed to abate, as though the plane itself was stunned by what had just happened. Cheryl froze, her hand trembling in midair, eyes wide. She realized too late what she had done. A hush blanketed the cabin, all eyes locking onto Ebony, who stared back in disbelief. Mark stood a few seats away, his face ashen with horror. Camille gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Ebony's cheek burned. Her mind spun with disbelief, shame, and a surge of indignation. She looked into Cheryl's eyes and saw fear, confusion, and perhaps the flicker of prejudice that had been simmering underneath. In that electrified second, Ebony's heart broke and solidified all at once, forging a resolve she didn't know she had. No one moved, no one spoke. All Ebony could hear was the hum of the cabin pressurization and her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. The hush dragged on, thick with collective disbelief. Then the pilot's voice, trembling slightly, returned over the intercom. "Cabin crew, please remain seated." It was a surreal moment. Cheryl still had her hand raised, frozen in place as if she couldn't believe what her body had just done. Ebony straightened, her breath coming in shallow gulps, her palm instinctively pressing against the cheek that had been struck. Before Ebony could speak, Mark rushed forward. He gently but firmly took Cheryl's arm and guided her away, whispering something Ebony couldn't catch. Nearby, Camille unbuckled herself, hurrying to Ebony's side. Natalie and Greg, further down the aisle, looked stricken, their bodies half out of their seats, as though they were unsure whether they should approach. "Ebony," Camille whispered, voice tight with concern. "Are you all right?" Ebony blinked, disoriented. The plane jolted again, but far milder this time. She nodded slowly, struggling to form words. Yeah, I'm okay." Camille's eyes brimmed with sympathy. I can't believe she..." Ebony inhaled, trying to steady herself. "I know," she murmured. "Just give me a moment." She stood, bracing against the seats as the plane dipped slightly. In the galley, she could see Cheryl's silhouette. The flight attendant looked stunned, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Ebony stepped forward, ignoring the stares from the other passengers, ignoring her own racing thoughts that questioned how something like this could happen on her plane by someone on her own payroll. Mark stepped between Ebony and Cheryl, desperation etched across his features. "Miss Dane, let me handle this. She didn't mean..." Ebony held up a hand, forcing Mark's words to still. "Let me speak," she said, her voice quieter and more measured than even she expected. Camille hovered close, ready to intervene if necessary. Cheryl lifted her gaze, and Ebony saw tears brimming at the edges of the flight attendant's eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Dane," she sputtered. "I got thrown by the turbulence and Ebony cut her off with a look that held no hostility, but an unmistakable firmness. "You slapped me," Ebony stated plainly, as though reaffirming the reality of what had just occurred. Whether it was an accident from the turbulence or a moment of anger, it happened. Tears began to streak Cheryl's cheeks. "I swear it wasn't out of hate. I was just startled." Ebony's composure wavered. "You and I both know there's been tension since Atlanta. You've questioned my presence on my own jet. You've spoken about me behind my back, as though I were some fraud. Perhaps you've let your prejudices shape your behavior. Perhaps you've had a bad day. Regardless, I don't deserve to be assaulted. Nobody does." She drew in a shaky breath. "This is unacceptable." In that moment, Ebony felt the weight of her experiences, the sum total of every time someone had doubted or disrespected her based on her appearance. Memories of early investor meetings where she was dismissed or belittled, or high society functions where she was treated like a novelty rather than a peer, surfaced in her mind. But those incidents had always been intangible slights, words, tones, covert looks, never a physical blow. Cheryl covered her mouth, sobbing now, her posture crumpling in on itself. Mark gently touched her shoulder, but she shrugged him off, focusing solely on Ebony. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident, I swear." Ebony closed her eyes for a moment, her heart pounding. She could feel the cabin's collective gaze. She remembered how her father had endured humiliations with quiet dignity, how her mother had always counseled her to remain stoic in the face of injustice. But Ebony also remembered her father's warning about standing up for herself when lines were crossed, and this was definitely a line. "We still have hours left to Tokyo," Ebony began, her voice low. "I need to feel safe on my own plane, and so do my colleagues." Cheryl's face went pale. She looked around as if searching for an exit in a space that had none. "I'm truly sorry," she repeated, softer this time. "I'll stay in the galley. I won't. Please let me stay until we land." Ebony inhaled, her anger tempered by the reality of their circumstances. They were in the sky, thousands of feet above the Pacific, with no immediate recourse to disembark or find alternative staff. "You will sit. You will not speak to me or my guests for the remainder of this flight," Ebony said, voice shaking with suppressed emotions. "When we land, you'll collect your things. I will be speaking to the aviation management company about your actions." Cheryl's shoulders slumped. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Mark guided her to a jump seat where she sank down, burying her face in her hands. Ebony stepped back, drawing a trembling breath. Camille slipped an arm around Ebony's shoulders, guiding her to her seat. Natalie and Greg approached quietly, their expressions a swirl of worry and outrage. "Ebony," Natalie said softly, "do you need anything? An ice pack or—" Ebony shook her head. "I just need a moment," she managed. She settled into her seat, heart pounding, mind racing. As the plane's engines droned on, Ebony closed her eyes, forcing calm into her body. Yet her cheek still throbbed, not just from the sting of the slap, but from the echo of a lifetime of prejudice culminating in that moment. She realized she was fighting back tears, surprising herself. She had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to remain unflappable in the face of adversity. But something about this incident, something so personal and direct, made her feel stripped raw. Eventually the cabin lights dimmed again for nighttime flight, though Ebony couldn't sleep. She remained upright, lost in thought, replaying the moment repeatedly in her mind. The rest of the cabin was quiet, subdued by the heavy atmosphere of what had happened. Even the turbulence seemed to have subsided, as though nature itself recognized that enough chaos had transpired. Long hours remained until they landed in Tokyo. Ebony knew that, once on the ground, she would have to decide how to handle the aftermath. Part of her seethed with righteous anger, demanding that Cheryl be fired immediately. Another part of her, one shaped by her parents' teachings and her own empathetic nature, wondered if there was more beneath Cheryl's actions than simple racism. Either way, Ebony knew this event would mark a turning point for everyone on board, and likely for herself most of all. They touched down at Tokyo's Haneda Airport under the cloak of early morning. Through the window, Ebony watched the city lights still dazzling from the night, transitioning into the gentle glow of dawn. The sense of relief that came with landing was palpable, like a collective exhalation of tension that had held them captive in the sky. As soon as the aircraft door opened, Ebony instructed Mark and Camille to escort Cheryl off the plane and into a private lounge area to await a conversation with Ebony and the aviation management representative. The rest of the passengers, many of them Ebony's associates, disembarked with hushed solemnity, casting concerned glances at Ebony as they left. Ebony felt a swirl of emotions, anger, betrayal, and an odd sense of sorrow. She didn't relish confrontation, but this needed to be resolved properly. "I can't just brush off someone striking me," she told herself. "But do I want vengeance, or do I want the truth?" In the discreet lounge, Ebony took a seat at a sleek wooden table. Camille stood nearby, phone in hand, ready to call Ebony's lawyers if necessary. Cheryl sat across from Ebony, head bowed. Mark hovered at a respectful distance, torn between loyalty to Ebony and sympathy for his colleague, though Ebony could see the disappointment on his face. A representative from the aviation management company, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, introduced himself as Mr. Hasegawa. He had flown in from another terminal when he heard about the situation. He greeted Ebony with a deep bow, apologizing profusely in both English and Japanese for the distress caused on the flight. Ebony offered a curt nod, still gathering her composure. "Thank you for your prompt arrival, Mr. Hasegawa. Let's get to the matter at hand." He nodded solemnly, directing his gaze to Cheryl. "Miss Martin, it has been reported that you committed an act of physical aggression toward Miss Dane. Is this correct?" Cheryl's voice was barely audible. "Yes, sir. There was turbulence, and I slapped her, but I didn't mean to. I'm deeply sorry." Mr. Hasegawa turned to Ebony, who had her arms folded protectively across her chest. "Miss Dane, how would you like to proceed? Our company has a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. Ebony inhaled, heart still pounding at the memory. She locked eyes with Cheryl, who looked ready to burst into tears again. Your policy should be followed. I won't stand in your way if you decide to terminate Miss Martin's employment. However, she paused, her tone softening. I also want to understand why this happened. Cheryl risked looking up. I was thrown off, literally. The turbulence. Ebony shook her head. Don't insult me or yourself by pretending this was purely an accident. There's been tension from the moment we boarded in Atlanta. You questioned my identity as the owner. You treated my colleagues and me with disdain. And in that moment of chaos, you lashed out physically. Maybe the turbulence triggered it, but the anger was already there. The lounge fell silent. Cheryl's face twisted with guilt. I'm sorry, she repeated, voice shaking. I was angry, frustrated. I let things get to me. Ebony's brow furrowed. Things like what? My presence as a black woman who isn't addressed like a billionaire? Or the fact that you just didn't like me? She paused, pushing down the lump in her throat. You do realize how offensive and dangerous this is? Cheryl swallowed, tears welling. I never meant... Look, I've had a difficult time. My family's been struggling. I lost my mother to cancer 2 months ago, and there were bills. I took this job thinking it would be glamorous and solve some money problems. Then I see someone like you, wealthy beyond imagination. It just felt unfair. I was envious, and maybe I believed you were flaunting it. I resented you. Ebony blinked, absorbing Cheryl's words. She turned her gaze downward, remembering the old adage, hurt people hurt people. For a moment, Ebony's anger and pain wavered, replaced by empathy. She knew how grief could distort judgment, how emotional turmoil could lead someone to lash out. But it wasn't an excuse to strike another person. Listen, Ebony said gently. I'm sorry for your loss. I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer, but that doesn't justify treating others with hostility, nor does it excuse violence. She glanced at Camille, who nodded in silent agreement. You slapped me, Cheryl. Do you understand how unacceptable that is? If I hadn't owned that plane, if I'd been anyone else, you would still be at fault. But the fact that I do own that plane makes this more than just a personal assault. It's an egregious breach of professional conduct. Mr. Hasegawa interjected. Miss Dane, we fully acknowledge the seriousness of this. We will follow protocol. Miss Martin will be placed on immediate suspension, pending an internal review, but I suspect the outcome will be termination. Shall we proceed with that? Ebony drew a long breath, her heart clenched with conflicting emotions. Cheryl was tearful, trembling with remorse, and Ebony could see genuine regret in her eyes, regret for both the physical act and for the prejudice she had harbored. Ebony found herself standing at a crossroads. She could demand termination on the spot, or she could offer a path toward redemption. Her father's voice flitted through her mind. Hate only wins when we shut the door to understanding. At length, Ebony spoke, voice quieter. Yes, follow your policy. Suspend her immediately. But before you decide on termination, I'd like you to consider one thing. If Miss Martin is willing to undergo bias training and counseling, and truly wants to reform her approach, I won't object to her eventually returning. That is, if she can prove she's learned from this. Cheryl stared, speechless. Mr. Hasegawa, too, looked taken aback. That's very generous, Miss Dane, he said after a pause. Ebony's cheek still ached faintly, reminding her of the indignity. Her stomach churned at the memory. She wasn't excusing or forgiving so easily, yet she believed in second chances under the right circumstances. What's the point of punishing someone without giving them a chance to grow? Ebony reflected. That, after all, was part of her philanthropic ethos, to uplift others and transform negative cycles. Don't mistake my empathy for weakness, Ebony warned, locking eyes with Cheryl. Your fate is in the company's hands now, but if you truly want to change, there might be a way forward. If not, you're done. Tears rolled down Cheryl's cheeks as she nodded, her voice cracking. Thank you, she whispered, though Ebony wasn't sure if Cheryl realized the road to real accountability was long. Once the meeting concluded, Ebony found herself alone in the lounge. Camille had stepped out to coordinate ground transport, and Mark had gone to check on some logistical details for the next leg of the trip to Dubai. The hush of the early morning airport felt oddly soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos and tension of the past many hours. Ebony cradled her phone, mind swirling. She'd just concluded a call with her father back in Atlanta, recounting the story of what had transpired. Ronald Dane, ever the pillar of calm, offered words that felt like warm balm to Ebony's frayed nerves. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," he'd said. "You stood up for yourself, but you also showed compassion. That's the mark of real strength." Yet Ebony's composure was cracking at the edges. As she sat alone, she felt tears trickle down her cheeks. The sheer emotional burden of being struck, of having her dignity questioned, was heavier than she'd allowed herself to admit in front of others. She pressed a hand to her stinging cheek, letting the tears fall freely. She was tired. Tired of constantly having to prove herself. Tired of meeting prejudice with patience. Tired of bridging gaps that should never exist in the first place. Minutes later, the lounge door slid open, revealing Natalie. The sociologist approached cautiously, arms extended in a gentle gesture of concern. Ebony quickly wiped her tears, trying to regain composure, but Natalie sank into the seat beside her and wrapped Ebony in a warm hug. "You don't have to be strong every second," Natalie murmured, letting Ebony rest her head on her shoulder. Ebony sniffled, her voice shaky. "I didn't think it would affect me so much. I've faced worse insults, worse assumptions, but being physically struck like that, it's different." Natalie nodded, understanding. "It's a violation of your body, your space. Words can be brushed aside, but a slap, it's visceral. It shatters that illusion of control." Ebony exhaled a shuddering breath. "I wonder if I did the right thing, offering her that path to redemption." "You did what felt right to you," Natalie replied gently. "And that's all any of us can do. You offered accountability and growth, not a free pass. That's far more than many would do." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken empathy. Eventually, Ebony pulled away, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, managing a faint smile. "You shouldn't have to see me like this." Natalie's eyes flashed with compassion. "What are friends for? I'd rather see you raw and real than watch you pretend it doesn't hurt." Ebony nodded. "Thanks, Natalie, for everything." They sat quietly for a few minutes, letting Ebony's tears dry, until Camille re-entered the lounge. Her brisk efficiency filled the space. "Ebony, the car is ready to take us to the hotel. Then we have the meeting with UNICEF's Asia-Pacific director at noon." She paused, taking in the warmth of the scene between Ebony and Natalie, her gaze softening. "We can push the meeting if you need more rest." "No," Ebony said, clearing her throat. "I need to keep going. This project, it's bigger than me. People are counting on us. Let's stick to the plan." Though Ebony's cheeks still throbbed, and her emotions remained fragile, she forced herself to focus on the positive. She reminded herself why she traveled halfway across the globe, the philanthropic mission aimed at improving the lives of countless families in developing regions. She believed in the cause, had poured her heart and resources into it. Letting this incident derail her passion wasn't an option. As she and her entourage left the lounge, Ebony noticed a quiet figure standing near the exit. Cheryl. The flight attendant was dressed in plain clothes now, her uniform folded over her arm, staring at Ebony with a mixture of guilt and longing for some final absolution. Ebony paused, glancing at her. Cheryl looked down, as though unworthy of meeting Ebony's eyes. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Ebony. She felt a flicker of that same outrage, remembering the sting of the slap. But she also saw a person suffering, weighed by grief and regret. Ebony inclined her head in a slight nod, neither a smile nor a scowl, just an acknowledgement. Then she moved on. They stepped out into the crisp Tokyo morning. The city, vibrant and bustling even at dawn, embraced Ebony with its hum of possibility. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool air invigorate her spirit. Despite the ache in her cheek, she found solace in the notion that each new city was a chance to make a difference, to build bridges rather than walls. Camille led them to a waiting limousine. Ebony settled into the plush interior, gazing out at the neon signs that were slowly dimming as daylight took over. Her phone buzzed with messages from sponsors and advisors. She would respond soon, but for now, she just wanted a moment to reflect. She considered all that had unfolded, the humiliating confrontation, the painful realization that prejudice still lurked in unexpected corners, and the resolution that offered a cautious path to redemption. What did it mean for Ebony moving forward? Was she, a black billionaire, destined to endure such disrespect, no matter how many philanthropic endeavors she championed? Or could her example of firm boundaries balanced with compassion inspire real change? As Tokyo's skyline rushed by, Ebony steadied herself with one truth. Every trial had shaped her into the person she was. The flight attendant's slap had left a mark, but not a scar that would define her. If anything, it had reignited her drive to create a world where fewer and fewer people carried the burdens of bias, fear, or envy. The fight would be long, but Ebony was ready to face it, cheek stinging, eyes clear, heart determined. Tokyo's cultural rhythm proved a soothing balm for Ebony's unsettled heart. The city streets teemed with life, uniformed workers commuting in seamless precision, neon lights flashing from storefronts, the aroma of fresh ramen drifting through alleyways. Despite her internal turmoil, Ebony felt oddly comforted by the bustling anonymity. It reminded her that the world was vast, filled with countless stories and possibilities, and hers was but one among many. Following a brief respite at the hotel, Ebony attended a critical meeting with UNICEF's Asia-Pacific director. The discussion centered on synergy. Ebony's philanthropic foundation would invest in local education infrastructures, while UNICEF provided on-the-ground logistical support. Their collaboration aimed to establish libraries and digital resource centers in underserved communities. Despite carrying the weight of the recent incident, Ebony delivered a poised, compelling pitch. Her passion shone through, galvanizing the UNICEF team. By the meeting's end, everyone was smiling and shaking hands. Satisfaction warmed Ebony's chest. She had endured a painful ordeal but refused to let it stall her mission. Yet once alone in the hotel corridor, Ebony's thoughts drifted back to the slap, the final tip of the iceberg that was Cheryl's prejudice. Was Ebony truly ready to move past it so quickly? She realized that healing was not a linear journey. It was an ongoing process, one that required introspection and perhaps some deeper confrontation of emotions. That evening, Ebony hosted a small dinner for her team in a private tatami room at a traditional restaurant. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, low tables, soft lantern light, the faint strains of koto music in the background. Over steaming bowls of miso soup and delicately arranged sushi platters, they reflected on the day's successes. Greg, with a bit of sake-induced bravado, raised a toast to Ebony. "To our fearless leader," he proclaimed, "who takes every challenge in stride and somehow keeps smiling." Laughter rippled through the group, easing the tension that had shadowed them since the flight. Ebony blushed, murmuring her thanks. She was glad for the camaraderie, but her gaze occasionally drifted to Camille, who wore a slightly pensive expression throughout dinner. When Ebony caught her eye, Camille offered a reassuring smile as though to say, "I'm fine, just thinking." After dinner, Natalie pulled Ebony aside. "I wanted to ask you something," Natalie said softly. "I've spent my career studying social inequalities. Would you consider speaking publicly about what happened on the plane? Not to shame Cheryl personally, but to highlight the reality of prejudice, even at high levels of society." Ebony hesitated. She was no stranger to media spotlights. She'd done countless interviews about her business triumphs and philanthropic ventures, but discussing the slap felt personal, raw. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "It's complicated. I don't want to sensationalize it, but I also see your point about raising awareness. Natalie nodded, resting a hand on Ebony's arm. Just think about it. Your perspective might resonate with others who've experienced similar discrimination. Ebony promised to consider it, though she wasn't ready to commit. The night wore on, and eventually the group disbanded to their respective rooms. Ebony slipped into her suite, exhaling the sort of tiredness that transcended physical fatigue. She wanted to shower, put on something comfortable, and lose herself in a novel. For a fleeting moment she recalled the time she'd imagined being wealthy enough to eliminate all her problems. Now, standing in a lavish hotel suite, Ebony felt the stark truth. Money did not buy immunity from pain. She sat by the window, gazing at Tokyo's glittering skyline. The city that never seemed to sleep was a testament to resilience and reinvention. High-rises soared beside ancient temples, blending modernity and tradition. Ebony found a metaphor in that. She, too, had to integrate her old wounds and new ambitions, forging a life that honored the complexities of her journey. Her phone buzzed. She checked it to find a message from Mark. All set for Dubai. Let me know if you need anything else. Get some rest, Miss Dane. She tapped out a quick reply. Thanks, Mark. Good night. Ebony paused for a long moment, then opened her contacts. She scrolled to a name she rarely used. Her therapist back in Atlanta, a compassionate woman named Dr. Corinne Wallace. It had been a while since Ebony had scheduled a session. Her business travel often disrupted therapy appointments. But Ebony realized she needed to process the emotional toll of what had happened. She composed a brief message. Hi, Dr. Wallace, it's Ebony. Something happened and I think I need to talk. Could we set up a video session soon? The act of asking for help was subtle but significant. Ebony found it both humbling and liberating. I'm human, she reminded herself. I'm allowed to feel hurt. I'm allowed to ask for support. With that, Ebony rose, turned off the lights, and let the hush of night envelop her. Sleep came slowly, her mind swirling with images. The jarring moment of the slap, the tearful apology, her father's reassuring words, the bright eyes of UNICEF's director signing that contract. Despite the lingering bruise on her spirit, she drifted into dreams fueled by a deeper conviction that each challenge, painful as it might be, was shaping her into a more empathetic, more resolute force for good. Within days, Ebony and her entourage had moved on from Tokyo to Dubai, stepping into a world of towering skyscrapers, luxurious malls, and bustling souks. The city's shimmering skyline reflected off turquoise waters, a testament to human ingenuity and audacity. Here, Ebony planned to close her final deal for the Sustainable Housing Project, an ambitious venture that would establish eco-friendly communities in desert regions, providing affordable living solutions to thousands of migrant workers. Her schedule in Dubai was relentless, back-to-back meetings with local developers, government officials, and international architects. Yet she felt a renewed sense of purpose fueling her every step. The memory of Cheryl's slap no longer consumed her thoughts, but it informed her actions. Discrimination lives in every corner of the world, Ebony realized. The work I'm doing is about more than just homes or libraries. It's about empowering people to transcend limiting narratives. In a gleaming conference hall overlooking the Arabian Gulf, Ebony delivered her concluding pitch to a panel of potential co-investors. The microphone felt cool in her hand as she spoke passionately about bridging wealth gaps, championing green energy, and cultivating communities that valued diversity. Her words resonated deeply, and when she ended, the room erupted in applause. One of the officials approached Ebony, offering a formal handshake. We are honored to partner with you, Miss Dane. Your vision is inspiring. The signing ceremony took place the very next day. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and Ebony's calm smile belied a kaleidoscope of emotions within. Once the formalities were over, Ebony found a quiet corner near a large window that overlooked the city. Camille soon joined her, pressing a glass of sparkling juice into Ebony's hand. To your success, Camille said warmly, clinking her own glass against Ebony's. How do you feel? Ebony gazed at the swirling skyscrapers, architectural marvels that pierced the sky. Grateful, she replied softly, and resolved. It feels like a new beginning somehow. Camille nodded, a contemplative light in her eyes. I have to say, watching you handle what happened on the plane, I'm in awe, Ebony. You showed so much grace. I can't imagine most people responding like you did. Ebony arched a brow. Honestly, I'm still processing it. It's easy to question whether I did the right thing by not demanding immediate termination. Camille shrugged. Maybe it's not about right or wrong. Maybe it's about choosing the path that aligns with who you want to be. And you did exactly that. Warmth spread through Ebony's chest. She thought about Dr. Wallace's response to her message. She had managed to schedule a video session after returning to Atlanta. Despite Ebony's busy lifestyle, she was finally making space for her emotional well-being. Self-care is part of the mission too, Ebony reminded herself. A soft chime from her phone interrupted her reverie. It was an email from Mr. Hasegawa, the aviation management representative in Tokyo. The subject line read, "Update on Cheryl Martin." Ebony inhaled sharply, bracing herself for whatever might be inside. She tapped it open. Dear Miss Dane, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to update you regarding Miss Martin's situation. Following our internal review, she has been officially suspended without pay for 4 weeks. She has agreed to undergo professional counseling and bias training as you suggested. Miss Martin asked me to relay a personal message. She remains deeply remorseful for her actions and is grateful for the opportunity to learn and possibly return to her duties, albeit under strict supervision. If you have any concerns or wish to discuss further, please let me know. Best regards, Mr. Hasegawa. Ebony exhaled, quietly relieved. She showed the email to Camille, who read it and placed a comforting hand on Ebony's shoulder. So it seems she's taking your offer seriously. Ebony nodded. I hope she truly grows from this, and if she doesn't, well, there are consequences. But I'd like to believe people can change. The final flight back to Atlanta was swift, the company charter having arranged a different attendant crew. There were no incidents, just a calm journey across continents. Ebony spent the flight drafting notes for her philanthropic foundation and reflecting on how her life had shifted in the span of just a few weeks. When they landed in Atlanta, Ebony stepped off the plane with a sense of homecoming. She was eager to see her parents, share the success of her deals, and also open up about the emotional turmoil she'd experienced. The slant of late-afternoon sunlight bathed the tarmac, illuminating Ebony as she strode with confident grace toward the waiting car. As she settled into the back seat, Ebony closed her eyes and let the hum of the engine lull her into a meditative state. The physical bruise on her cheek had faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of her resilience. The intangible bruises, those inflicted by prejudice and violence, would take more time to fully heal. But Ebony felt prepared for the journey. She would continue forging alliances, championing projects that changed lives, and speaking up about the subtle and overt injustices that pervaded society. Her father's words guided her still. Keep your head up, baby girl. She would. And in doing so, she would lift others along the way, turning moments of pain into pathways to empathy and growth. Thank you for journeying through this story of turbulence and triumph. Ebony Dane's resolve in the face of prejudice reminds us that no matter the heights of success we achieve, we're all susceptible to the wounds of ignorance. Yet her compassionate choice to offer a path toward redemption shows that even painful encounters can pave the way for growth and change. If this story resonated with you, please help us continue the conversation by sharing it widely. Like this video to show your support, leave a comment with your thoughts or personal experiences, and subscribe to stay connected to more stories of resilience and empowerment. Your engagement makes a real difference in spreading understanding and empathy across our digital community. Together, let's keep our heads held high and our hearts open, moving ever closer to a world where everyone is seen and valued.